Thanks for coming. I know you have other things to do in New York other than sit here and listen, so apparently you like photography. And I assume everybody here knows what we're talking about. Those people on the web, I hope you know what we're talking about. We're talking about flash photography. We're talking about finding great light, working with that light, and then augmenting that light with our flashes. The reason I prefer flash photography to like constant light sources is that constant light sources are a lot weaker than a flash and they're a lot bigger than a flash. So if you want some really quality light from a constant light source, you end up needing something fairly large and something that has a lot of power, which these little flashes like this can pack a big punch, and I can fit a lot of them in one bag and I can get a lot of places. So you'll see us working with flashes as we go, because that's my favorite additional light source other than the sun. So the sun's a really good starting point. First off, let me thank B&H for having me here and for having this great space for us to learn in, and also thank Canon for providing the same opportunities for you all. It's amazing when you think about companies like Canon and like B&H, their goal is to educate you, which is fantastic because there's so much free education for people simply because these people who have created stores for us and cameras for us and gear for us, they really want you to know how to use the gear well because they want you to enjoy the experience that you have with the things that they sell to you. So, and I love photography. I started as a photographer when I was a senior in high school. And I just happened upon it because I was trying to prove that it was a very easy thing to do. I was taking an art class, and in high school, it was actually a humanities class, and my friend and I were attempting to show our teacher that all this art that we were studying was ridiculous because it was easy to do. So we'd study like Jackson Pollock, and so then we'd go throw a bunch of paint on a sheet, and then we'd take it in class and say, see, we can do that. It's no big deal. And then we would study, Alexander Calder. And so then we would build a mobile and hang it from a ceiling and say, see, we can do that. It's no big deal. Of course, ours were really trashy versions of whatever we were accomplishing. But then we studied Ansel Adams. And I thought, how hard can that be? You just take a camera and you point it at something pretty and you've got a pretty picture, right? So I went out and we were discussing earlier before we went live that I come from a very small town in northern Arizona where there's more cows than people. And so I took my mom's camera and I went out onto my ranch, my grandfather's ranch. And my grandfather's ranch is a very, very large property. It takes about 3 days to travel around the ranch. And the only reason that is because you need a lot of property to feed one cow, because the cows have to eat one bite and then they have to walk a long way to get to the next piece of grass, and then they actually lose weight by eating because they have to move around a lot. So it's a very large property, and I drove around all day long taking pictures, and when I got back I had to go to it was film time, and so I had to go to the drugstore, and I sent the photos away, and they came back and they were really good. So I said, see, that was easy, right? So I never even touched cameras again until I went to college. And when I went to college, I just happened to take a photography class. I thought it'd be interesting, and I fell in love because when I started taking pictures, I realized I wasn't any good. And I had just had some beginner's luck at the beginning, and I knew that I had it in me to take good pictures, but I didn't know what I had done or how I had done it, and so it took me a long time to get back to that point. So I think things like photography and arts like photography are interesting when we realize that A, we have the ability, we have the eye, but B, it's a challenge, it's difficult. And that's why we're all here today, because it's a difficult thing. It's not easy to light something. It takes practice, right? But that's why we like it, because it takes practice, because it's challenging. So I'm going to talk to you about the principles that I think about and use when I'm photographing on location. And most of what I do is photograph on location. I don't do a lot of studio work simply because my studio is the great outdoors. I love taking location photography. I'm mostly a wedding and portrait photographer. I do a lot of senior portraits, but basically everything I do has to do with people. So editorial portraits, but I'm always on location, very rarely in a studio. And so when I'm on location, I need lights to help augment things. Very rarely do I take a portrait without some kind of light assisting me in making that portrait. So let's start talking about that. So what I have is a series of different photographs, and we're going to go through those photographs. I'm going to talk you through how I think when I'm photographing. The first thing I want to talk about is just the need for light. Now, this is just all available light. This is the artist. It's a musical artist named Mindy Gledhill, and she's getting ready for her show. And you can see that the light is just coming down from the available light source, which is up above here. And fortunately, this was actually shot with the 5D Mark IV, the Canon 5D Mark IV. And so you can get a really high ISO on that thing and still get a really beautiful picture. And so I'm photographing this with that great high ISO without any light, but the light that's coming down, just because I can capture it, doesn't mean it's going to be great. Because the direction of light kind of darkens her eyes here, and so it's not quite as perfect as it could be. And so then I start adding light into the equation. And so let me show you what the end result to that photograph was. And all that is one simple light that's added into the equation. Same mirror that I'm photographing through, the same person doing the same thing, but in the end, because I add one simple light, it changes everything. Now, I want to show you, though, the first error. And the first error is where the light comes from. So with the light coming from this side, it's not quite as interesting and it's still, she's a beautiful woman and it's still a fairly interesting shot, but the light coming from this side tends to widen out her face, it tends to flatten everything up. It's not quite as deep a shot as when we go back to this. And it's simply a question of where you position your light. So the position of the light is fairly critical in the way that you organize your photograph. Really, the position of your light is part of your compositional strategy inside of your photograph. And we typically think of our composition in a photograph as just a where does the light pole go, and where is the road, and where is the windowsill, and where is the person. And most of the time, most people who are taking pictures, they think only of where's the person in position to the frame. So they think rule of thirds, right? And that's the extent of their compositional strategy. I'm going to put the person over here on this third. I'm going to put the person kind of high up. I'm going to put the horizon kind of down on the lower third of the photograph. And that's what they think is composition. But where you position your light changes your composition internally inside of the camera. And so now I have all of these really interesting shapes that are happening, this triangle of light that's happening here. So the internal composition of her face changes because I've moved that light. So we're going to talk a lot about the position of light. Of course, in the end, some photographs that we take have to have light, because without the light, there is no additional light to support us. For instance, here, the sun is setting over the lake, and if I photograph her without light, she's just dark. She would just be a silhouette. And so that's not an interesting enough portrait, so we need to add light in those circumstances. Okay, so let's talk about how we create light or find light. Now, this is my daughter, and we were traveling around this little kind of a farm inside of our city, and we went into this old farmhouse, and she's looking at a spider in a window. And as I'm looking, I just see this beautiful moment. My daughter is not paying attention to me, which means she's going to look super beautiful because, as we all know, as soon as kids look at you, they totally ruin it because they try and smile and they try and change things. So I'm really excited about that, but look at the quality and the beauty of that light. That's the kind of light, when we find it originally, when it's just happening, which is very rare that we find the perfect light, we get really excited about it and we take it and we know what we're looking for. The problem is that when you don't have that light occurring naturally, most people don't know how to create it. They don't know how to fix light that's not happening naturally. So that's what we want to talk about today, is finding the best possible light to photograph in and then augment that light to make it perfect. And that's where our flashes come in. So I want to show you this image. So I love this image. It's a beautiful image. It's my son, so he's one of my favorite subjects. But I love the image, but I want you to notice something about where I've chosen to photograph. A lot of people battle with light constantly because they go out and they find a location based on what the location looks like. So for instance, if I'm running around in New Jersey and I'm looking back at Manhattan, and I want to use Manhattan as the backdrop, that's not enough, because I have to think about where the light is going to be and how the light's going to fall on Manhattan and also on my subject. And if I don't think about that, it's very likely that I'll have my subject squinting into the sun and looking horrible and flat lit in the front. So what I do, the first thing I do is I look for a location that has beautiful light, and generally speaking, I want the light coming toward me. And you can see in this circumstance, I found some shade, just a little bit of open shade, and I've got the light trickling down through the trees and through all the grasses here, and it's coming towards me. But it's stopped just short of my subject so that I can light my subject independently from the beautiful backdrop that I've got. So I will always look for those opportunities where shade is provided so that I can then relight. Now, what I've done here is I've pretended that the sun was involved in this, but the sun is not striking my sun at all. There's no light coming from the sun. This is complete shadow up to the subject, which is a perfect opportunity because now we have the opportunity to relight the subject and pretend that the sun was involved. If the sun was actually striking him, it would actually be silhouetting him because the sun was back there. And it would have just barely rim lit him, and that's all it would do. And so what we do, and let me show you the other option. The other option is to have a camera, on-camera flash. Now this doesn't look bad, does it? It's fine. So an on-camera flash, straight on towards the subject, does generally the same thing. I'm able to kind of light him, and you can see that the sun is just rim lighting him, and that's all it's doing. But instead, what I want a more interesting look on him, and I want more volume to his face and to his body. And so instead of having my flash on the camera, I simply take the flash off of the camera and move it around to the other side of that tree. So now you'll see, there we go. Now the flash is literally behind the tree here, and you can see that it's striking the tree just a little bit, and then it's coming around the tree, and it's hitting here and creating a shadow on the front of his nose. And so it looks as though the sun is what's lighting him rather than the light coming from the opposite direction of the sun. So throughout all of my work, I'm always trying to, what I like to say is follow light. So I'm looking for light, and then I'm trying to follow its direction. Now, sometimes I don't get shade. Sometimes I end up on a canyon edge, and there are no trees, because most of Arizona is no trees. And so I don't have any trees to block them, nothing to shade them. I don't have any big scrims that I throw up in front of them. And so what I'm doing here is I'm looking at the natural occurring light. Now I want the sun. You can see the sun is setting back here. It's really beautiful. You can see how the sun is coming towards me. It's creating a lot of volume because I'm seeing light and then shadow and the light shadow. As the shadow's in front coming towards you, that creates that volume. And I love it, but without a flash, I'm going to have a silhouette. The question is, where do you put your flash? Now in this case, it's just one flash with a small softbox about this size. So it's one flash with a small softbox, but where do you put your flash? You follow the light. So you'll notice that the sun is coming from over here, and if you look at their faces, you can see that the shadow is on the left side of the nose, which means my flash is coming from the right, which is where the sun is coming from. A lot of people make the mistake of trying to light to compete with the sun. So if the sun is on the left-hand side, they'll try and fill flash from the right-hand side and try and equalize the two. That doesn't help you at all, because now you're going to flatten out your subject. And plus, not only that, by competing with the sun, it's hard to compete with the sun. The sun has a lot of power. So instead of competing with it, work with it. So in this case, instead of competing with the sun and having my flash on the right-hand side to try and fill in their shadows, I simply move the flash over to the left-hand side, or the right-hand side, depending on how you look at it. I'm over here, and now I'm working with the sun. The sun creates the rim light, and then I'm just extending the reach of the sun. And I'll take my flash and just move it as far as I have to in order to reach around that nose and hit that other side of the face, or reach around that person and hit the other person. That's as far as I need to go. Once I've done that, it will look to you, to the viewer, like the sun is doing that, because all I'm doing is trying to extend the size of the sun, just trying to reach it around that corner. So in every instance, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to follow the light of the sun, or whatever the existing light source is. In this case, you can see that the sun is setting over here, so where's my light? It's right over here. Now in this case, I'm using a silver umbrella, actually this silver umbrella right here. So it's a deep silver umbrella, which really packs a good punch. So if you have a flash and you need extra power from that flash, as often we do, because a small flash sometimes can't compete with the sun until you add the right modifier. So you take the right modifier, like a silver reflective umbrella, and suddenly you can get a lot more light out of that flash. Yeah?
So you didn't have the diffusion on it for that shot?
Not for this shot. It was pure silver. So it's just a silver umbrella here to then add some oomph to the flash, right? But the key to this is that I've got the light coming down from the same location where the sun would be, so you can't see that that's a flash. It seems like the sun is just lighting them. And then, of course, right here, I faked that. That's not really on. So I faked that in Photoshop, actually in Lightroom right afterwards. And then this light here, because it spreads a little bit, is actually lighting this whole area here. And then I just simply do a little bit of burning right there so that it looks like it's his lamp that's lighting that floor instead of my flash. So I'm always trying to, Ansel Adams said it best. He says the photographer is only successful to the extent that he can hide his hand. So anywhere possible, I'm trying to hide my hand. I don't want you to think that I was lighting it. I want you to think that I just happened upon this person in the night walking down these stairs, and that lamp happened to be lighting them. But that's not the case. This light does not have enough power to light her. So this is actually a light right here coming down on her here. Just one light here, and then another light right back here coming down and lighting these steps up and giving me a shadow on these. So there's one light coming back toward the camera, right off frame here coming this way, and one light here lighting her that way. So it all looks like it comes from that light, but it doesn't. So everywhere I go, I'm looking for what's the current lighting condition? What's the lighting in this street? Where does the light come from? It comes from over here, so I light her that direction, so that you can't tell that I'm involved in the lighting process. I just look like I'm running around taking pictures of people and there's just gorgeous light happening, but it's not. I'm just following the natural light. The light comes from over here, so I light her from over here. So everywhere I go, I'm following that light. Now, sometimes you wind up in really interesting positions where there's a goat wearing a dress. and you have to capture it. Now this does, I'll show you the pieces here in a second. But you can see that I take a picture in a really cool, interesting location. The light is coming from this window for the background. So then when I piece the whole thing together, I take a picture of the model in the dress, and I light her from the same position with the same general lighting. So I've got a little softbox on there to try and create that feeling of a window. Then I go out and I photograph the goat, and I photograph the goat's legs, right? And I'm photographing from the light is coming from the right. Same thing there. See how the light's coming from the right? And when it's all put together, the goat has the correct lighting, the dress has the correct lighting for the place that I want to put the goat in, right? So even when we're compositing, we're trying to manufacture light that looks like it already exists. So here's a really interesting example. So I come upon a scene here. This was in Barcelona, and the model, this is going to be a day for night. We want it to be dark. We want it to look like she's out on the town in the night, but this is what the scene looks like. So it's nice and bright, just open shade. But again, I've escaped the sun. I've gotten away from it, and I've gotten into some open shade where I can control things. And then I darken my exposure. So that's what it looks like for the background. I've taken the background. Now I just have to relight her to make it look like light is coming from somewhere to hit her. Where would the light come from? The light would come from up here if this was on. So I light her as though the light is coming from up here down like this. So I've just got a light right up here. It's an umbrella. It's a silver umbrella just like that. And it's coming down like here, just like this. And then I've got one more light right back there, just bare head, and it's coming back towards her to rim light, because I can assume that if there's a lamp on this side of the street, there's a lamp on that side of the street. So I'm thinking through this the whole time I'm lighting someone, and then once I get into post, I simply turn that light on, and I add a little reflection of the light that would be in that window, so it sells the fake. And so now I have light coming from this light that was not on here, and it looks like she is being lit by a lamp in the night when really we shot the whole shot during the day. So we're constantly looking, even if the light doesn't currently exist, we're looking at where the light would come from, because we're telling a story where light comes from. Because that light, if we have a big light source, it'll look like it's coming from a window or a sky. And if we have a small light source, it's going to look like it's coming from a lamp post or maybe a flashlight or maybe the sun. So we're going to sell that to whoever's looking. So let's go to, hold on, I've got a, all right. So in this circumstance here, this is another instance where we come in somewhere where there's no real necessarily light, there's not a light source. The sun's not there. We can turn on and off all the lights, right? So we have complete control over our environment. But when I walk into the scene, the first thing I saw when I walked into this scene was there was this glow from this kind of like safety light. So the first thing I did is mimic that light by putting a light way up here in the corner to create that glow, but big enough and bright enough that I could actually photograph it. Then that light source is lighting the back of him, and it's giving her a little rim light there. And then I add a softbox here to light her. But notice it's all still coming from that same side where I light from here and I follow the original light source or the original inspiration for the light source. All right? So I'm constantly looking for those opportunities to follow light or where the light would be. Sometimes the lights actually get involved in the scene. So this is a photograph that was taken in Krakow, and it's in the Opera House in Krakow. And so this has one softbox over here, and see those two little speed lights up there? So these are two Canon 600 RT speed lights way back there. They're just sitting on the they have a little crate or a foot that comes with them, and that we just literally went up to the top balconies and set them up there. And because I can control them directly from the camera with the radio controller, I can determine how bright they need to be, and I just wanted it to look like there were spotlights on her, so my Canon spotlights are up there. So, but you wouldn't know necessarily that that wasn't constant lights that were always on. So I'm selling a story, and you can see that my lights are doing two things. They're making a point that this is a theatrical performance, but it's also helping to separate her from the background, because that arm would just disappear into that background were it not for the separation that was being created by those background lights that are coming in. But I'm never afraid of putting my lights in the scene themselves, because they can be very useful as an element for the composition of the photograph and sell it. For instance, here, that is not the movie projector. That is a light. That's a flash. So it's just flash coming down here, and that's what's creating the rims on all of the seats. So it's being useful in creating that depth, but it's also part of the story. So don't shy away from the idea of your flashes actually being involved. Sometimes they can actually be very useful in the scene, as well as do the job of rim lighting and creating depth. The star comes from just your aperture. Depending on what aperture you're at, you'll get more or less star effect from something. So that aperture just kind of changes how many. The same thing was true here. You can see that that one's got kind of a starry effect to it as well. So it just depends on your aperture, and as you play with it, you'll get to know what aperture is going to give you what effect on your lights. They'll either be very blobbish or they'll have a little star effect to them. So yeah, I don't use any filters for that kind of stuff at all. So in this case, I love this hallway, and I needed actually quite a few speed lights in this. So I have 5 speed lights, and I used every single speed light in order to create the shot. So I have one that's with a softbox right up here, and then the rest of them are actually being used to light these hallways all the way down the hallway, because there's light coming in from here, but it was just barely glowing. So this is window, 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 but it wasn't enough to light the entire interior. So I've got a flash in each one of these hallways just pounding up into the ceiling to just kind of create a glow, so it looks like these lights are actually lighting. And then this dark hallway back here was literally a black abyss. And so with a speed light down on the ground just pointing into this in the top, we were able to create that kind of glow in the background as well, so that her black hair doesn't just fall off into nothingness down there. Okay, so here's another situation where we get to create the light. So a lot of the times we're battling with the sun, but once we get into to clouds, which you guys probably have a lot more here in New York, they have it a lot in Seattle, they have it a lot in Portland, but in Arizona we get no clouds. So when I'm anywhere that's overcast or rainy or cloudy, I'm in heaven, because I get to control the light at that point. And so in this case, I control the light by simply, she's just in the general shade of the clouds, and so everything has a nice glow to it, but then I want to bring her out. If I didn't have flashes involved, she wouldn't pop out of the scene. She would kind of just fade back into everything, and there would be dark circles in her eyes and things like that. And so I'm just going to show you behind the scenes so that you can see how it was shot. So in this case, I have and you can see on her face, see how it's very soft all the way around. There's a little bit more shadow on this side of the nose than anything, so the light is definitely coming from this direction, but it's pretty dang soft. And the reason it's so soft is that I'm actually using 3 lights as my main light source. So I'm creating a kind of a faux softbox that's really big. Because what I'm doing is the light that's over here, that's on her, basically the right-hand side of her, that light is a pretty powerful light. And I don't remember exactly what the setting is, but let's just call it X. Then this light, the second light that's kind of at a 45-degree angle from her, is at X divided by half. So it's 1 stop under X. And then my final light here, which is just off my right shoulder, so it's just almost directly on her, but just slightly right of her, that one is X minus 2 stops. So what it's doing is it's creating a naturally decaying wrap all the way around here. The strongest light being over here, and then it gets weaker and weaker and weaker until the front light is the weakest possible light that I have. And by doing that, it helps to sell the story that the sun is coming from over here, the light is coming from over here, and then it's just spilling a little less and a little less and a little less. It's kind of the same natural result that you would get if you had a softbox, except the difference is a softbox has 1,000,000 points on it. It's an infinite number of points. So a softbox is no different than this, except that there are like 1,000,000,000 points of light coming at, and so because of that, they fill in their own shadows. So the more points of light you have, and in a softbox's case, it's a continuous set of points of light. It literally is an infinite number. In my case, I only have 3. So when you're in a condition where you want softer light, but you only have, and a lot of the times I work places like this is windy out here. I work on the side of a canyon. I can't put this on the side of a canyon because either it or my assistant both will go off the canyon. And so I have to work with just hard heads, just bare-headed flashes. And so when you're working with that and you want to soften up a bare-headed flash, just simply employ a couple extra flashes in the process and let them kind of naturally fall off. And then that one that's right at the front, that's the one that kind of the weakest flash that fills in the shadows. One of the negative side effects of having multiple flashes instead of a very large softbox is that they will create a shadow edge. So like you'll see, like if I turn here, there's a shadow on my nose. So as I have a shadow on my nose here, if I use another light to fill it will fill in that shadow, but it will create its own shadow as well. And then the other one's going to fill that one in. And so the more points of light you have, the less those edges of those shadows show up. But if you only have 2 or 3, you might see that, and you just have to smooth that out in Photoshop, which is perfectly doable. It's very easy to do, so it's not a big deal. Yeah. So if I were to use a softbox in this case, it would have been off to her right. But notice, look at the picture itself. That softbox would have had to be an awfully big softbox in order to create the same light, because I've got it quite a ways away from her. So it would have to be a very large softbox to give me the same feeling that it did when I just used 3 This is like, if you compare the amount of light and the reach of the light and how it's kind of tapering off, this is like a 30-foot softbox. It's just 3 points of light that are decaying slowly. The only thing I have to do is kind of smudge the edges between those 3 shadow lines, and I'm done. And so when I'm in a condition where there's a lot of wind and I have a situation where I need extra space here, so I don't have a big enough softbox, and if I did, it would blow over in the wind. At that point, I'm just going to use 3 points of light. Does that make sense? Okay. The only reason, I love rim light. I love to have a light that comes back towards the camera. In this case, it wasn't quite possible because I would have had to put a light in the water. And I'm not sure that it would have stayed up. It would have fallen over, and then I would have lost a flash, which I've done before. I've lost flashes in water before. Okay, so how do I work out the position of the flashes? In all cases, the first thing, and I want my flashes to be as close to my subject as possible. So if I'm taking a portrait of you, I'm going to have my flash, if it's just a headshot, I'm going to have my flash right here. And by the way, we all know, everybody should know and hopefully knows that the quality of the light that you get, whether it's soft or hard, is based solely on how big it is in comparison to you, the subject. And so if my flash is this far away from you, it is a fairly small light source. But as I get it closer to you, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so the closer I get to you with a speed light, the softer it gets, right? It may be hard to control because it's so powerful, but if you go down to like 50 ISO, you can you can manage this, especially if it's lower power. So I want my flash to be right off the edge of my camera. So wherever that camera's edge is, that's where my flash is going to be. So I literally will find my frame, and then I'll have either my assistant or myself go over and I'll move that flash in until it's just barely off frame. And once in a while, if I really need it, I'll put that flash into the frame and just remove it. Let me show you an example of that. So when I'm in a harsh light condition, like say this one, and the light is really harsh, and I need to somehow fill in this guy's face, I just put the flash in there. And then in Lightroom, I'm in completely raw, so this is a raw image. This is not Photoshopped, and neither is this. It's a raw image. Just in Photoshop, I just select that flash and it's gone. Now the other flash is equidistant from that one to him, is right here, right off the frame, pointing at her, in order to just fill. Now notice that both of those flashes are coming from where? The direction of the sun. The sun's over here. You can see the rim light that's being created. And so my flash is right here off of this side to mimic that sun, because I'm only employing 2 flashes here. So I'm trying to be as efficient as possible with the number of flashes I'm throwing up. And I put one on her, one on him, because there's no way this flash is going to reach to him and give the same light. So I need to put 2 flashes in there. And by doing that, I'm able to light them. Now, I just shot this shot. So here's my son. He's wearing a hat. It's dark under there, right? And I'm just adding 1 flash to it in order to, but notice that I'm putting it in the same position where the sun is. So I'm putting it right, and it's literally right here, just right off the edge of the camera. So it's like this. It's as close as it can be before it's in the camera. So my other son is holding it, and he's in the frame, and I go, okay, go closer, get back up, right there. And that's where he holds it. And he's just simply holding a little speed light, but he's holding it in a position where it will create a little bit of a shadow here. That shadow is from my light, not from the sun. If he holds it too low, then we see that it's a flash, because the sun would create a shadow on his head from the brim of his hat. So this light has to be slightly above in order to allow for a bit of that shadow to hit his forehead. Not too much, because then his eyes are cut. So it's just right, so that we get a little bit of shadow from the hat brim, and then we're hitting his eyes with the light. So the position of the light is really important, but it's always the closeness of the light is first based on what's my frame. As soon as I know my frame, I know how close I want those lights, because I generally want them to be softer rather than harder. So that's the first thing. Then, in regard to where I place the light in position to the person, it's a question of how much shape do I want on the person. If I want the person to have a lot more volume, especially if it's a man, and I want it to be kind of a rough looking, amazing, something that's real dramatic, then I'll put it more to the side of them, so that's a real cross light. And then as it becomes more important for me to soften up that light, I keep moving it around until finally it'll be right off my shoulder here, but never right here. Now I will show you, it is possible to do on-camera flash and make it look good. That's not impossible to do. But you have to understand what you're doing, and I'll show you what I do when I use on-camera, because on-camera can be a little bit tricky. So, here, I'll show you this before I leave, just because I think it's pretty. So this is out, and the sun is creeping, so these clouds are all over, but that sun is just barreling down and hitting them. And this is what it actually looks like. So you see how the sun is coming down and hitting them and creating a shadow here and shadow on her face. And so I move the flash off the camera, off to the right, and now it looks like it's part of the sun, but it fills in her face a bit so that we can see this moment between my wife and my daughter, right? But it's just one light just filling from the direction of the sun, and it'll fix a million issues real fast, as long as you don't fight the sun. Now, when you're on camera, The first opportunity that I look for is something to bounce that flash off of. Because if I bounce it, then the flash A is not coming from my camera, it's coming from this sheet over here. If I could bounce it off of here, I'm just going to bounce back at you, right? So that's a big light source as opposed to a small light source. I'm always trying to increase that light source size. So in this case, I'm inside of a room where the bride's getting ready, and there's just all sorts of white ceiling over here, and there's tan wall over there. So I simply take my light and I bounce it up into the ceiling slightly over to the right. So I just simply spin this flash on camera so that it's like that. So now my light source is this big white ceiling, a little bit of a tan wall, and it's all coming this way, and it kind of lights her and gives her kind of a soft, warm light to fill in what otherwise would have been a silhouette. So that's my first goal if I'm inside and I can bounce flash. Same thing here, I'm in a big hall, they're getting married, or this is the rehearsal dinner, and I'm simply bouncing it off of that corner of the ceiling over there, and it's coming down and filtering in like that and lighting them really nicely. So big light sources are great when you bounce, if you can bounce something. But when you're outside, like let's say here, you don't necessarily have the ability to bounce something. So then it's a matter of going to fill flash, and if it's going to be on your camera, then it needs to be less bright than the light source that is creating the scene. So for instance, the sun is coming back and it's filtering through their hair. This light has to be less bright than that. Otherwise, you'll see that it's flashed. So usually around minus 2/3 or 1 stop is about where I want my flash to be, especially if you're in TTL. So you'll put it in TTL. So it's actually doing metering through the lens, and it's looking at the entire scene, and it says, okay, I think, as the flash, I think I need this amount of light to match what I'm seeing back there. And then I'll simply take that and dial it down about 2/3 a stop to begin with. Sometimes it's a little bit more, sometimes it's less, depending on what the scene looks like. And it will just fill them in. But as long as it's not overpowering, your eye won't really pay much attention to it. But it will create very flat light. You can see that they don't have any major direction of light to them, simply because it's all coming straight on from the camera. So it's possible to do light straight from your camera, and if you kind of follow that general rule, always assume that the light behind them should be more powerful, and the light coming in to fill them should be less powerful by about 2/3 a stop to a stop. You're going to get pretty good at it. And if you can look at it and you can and look at it and say, that doesn't look like there's a flash there, that's what you want. So you kind of dial it up and down. And if you're going to shoot a lot, I would suggest going into a manual shot. So if you're going to do a portrait session and things are going to stay stable, I would suggest instead of being in TTL, because as you're in TTL, as you reframe, if you include the sun in the shot, your flash is going to power down or up, it's just going to move around. So as you frame this way, it's going to power down. As you frame this way, it's going to power up to try and match the light. And you don't want that. Once you get the light the way you want it, leave it. So if you turn it to manual and allow the flash to keep going at the same rate all the time, then as long as you're not moving and the subject isn't moving in relationship to each other, then leave the flash in manual and let it just cycle through. Plus, you'll save a lot of batteries that way, because sometimes it'll get like a full-on pop of flash because you reframed, and all of a sudden the flash goes, oh, well, we need a lot more light, and it'll waste some of your battery power. So if you can stay in manual, that's where I'd prefer to be. However, the TTL is really good on the Canon flashes and the Canon cameras, especially the newer cameras, because they've got the chips that they're using now in order to read the light that's coming through the lens and the TTL metering is now actually reading for faces and for colors and things like that. So it really actually knows, oh, the flash that I'm sending out that's the face reflecting back, whereas I don't need to try and get the city to reflect back to me. And so they're much better now at the Mark IV level is about where that starts. So the Canon 5D Mark IV is where you start to get that really incredible depth of metering. And so now your TTL is even more accurate than it was before. So it's very possible to do really great stuff with your flash on camera, but you just have to be aware that you want your flash not to be the main light source. The flash is always the secondary, it's always the fill, it's augmenting light. Remember that term, you augment light. So whatever the light is that currently exists, just augment it. Don't try and recreate it. Don't try and fight it. Just find beautiful light that already exists and then perfect it, right? Okay, so any questions so far that you have that are out there? How are we on time, by the way?
You have about an hour.
1 hour, awesome, good. All right, so let me talk to you about, I love a lot of light. I love it when people are just encircled and enveloped in light. Like light was just giving them a big hug. So this is the kind of light I love to see, but this is not just a shot that was taken in available light. This was planned out. So the light that you see right there, that's not the sun. That's my flash. All right? And then there's another light right here flashing this way to fill in. Actually, it's flashing right here. Just like that, just off my right shoulder to fill in, but it doesn't look like it. It just looks like they're enveloped in light in this beautiful, sunny, bright, wonderful day where they're wearing coats and stuff. This is in Arizona. It's not that cold. Okay, so, but I'm employing lights to create the feeling that there's an actual sun there, but I want it to feel like it's real, not flashed, yeah.
But the sun is setting behind those trees?
The sun is setting behind the trees, which is what's creating this. It's actually kind of cloudy back there, and so it's got like that general direction, but it's not bright enough to do what I want. It doesn't have the sparkle. So anytime I employ all it takes is one little speed light in the back like this to create sparkle. And everything just glitters and sparkles, especially when there's grass and there's trees and leaves. Oh, I love throwing a flash through leaves because it just sparkles and everything feels like it's alive. So here's another example. That's not the sun setting, that's a flash. And then over here is just a softbox coming this way, right? So I love playing with that light inside the frame. Now, this next picture is a really important picture. I call it second thoughts. It's my favorite photo. So I call it, what on earth did I do? Is this the right move? Okay, so this is what we were really going for here. But you can see in this scenario, I have lights attached places. So I have two speed lights, one speed light right there and one speed light right there, and both of them are attached to the windows with something like this. It's just a little cradle. It's made by Tether Tools, and it just literally just sits on, you just attach it with a sticky thing to the window, and it looks like light is just coming through the windows, but it's just these two flashes stuck up on a window. And I have flashes stuck, so when I shoot a reception, I literally stick 4 flashes in every corner of the reception. So I have a speed light. Sometimes the speed light has to be connected via like a super clamp to the DJ stand. So that's a really great place. So sometimes I just, see that? So the DJ stand just has a light clamp to it. And the DJ doesn't mind that light sitting up there, and it just fires whenever I want it to. And I just make every single one of these flashes. So this one will be, see, that one's on a window. This one's on the wall. So I'm just connecting flashes everywhere I need them, so I need them all the way around the room. So if I have one light in each corner of the room, so I have 4 flashes, and then I have one flash on my camera so that I can bounce into the ceiling, or I can take a quick happy snap of 2 friends together or whatever. So I have all of the flashes I need, and then I can simply, from the flash itself, I can turn on and off my A, or this is A, B, C, D, E.
I mean, from your camera.
from my camera, from the flash itself. I just simply, because once you're connected through the link system in the 600 RT flash system, it's connected by radio. And so all I do is just go from one group to the next, and I can turn them on and off really quickly. I just go to the group, and I hit on or off, and then they light up, and I shoot. So what I want in a general scene is if I'm photographing, like in this scene right here. So what I want is I want light coming from the background here, and then I want light coming from on this side over here. So I simply turn that one off. So I turn this one off, which is my B light. I always go in like this. So my right to my left. So counterclockwise, I just say, okay, the back of the room, that's my B. A is always on camera, B, C, D, E. So I always know which light is which. So if I'm in the room and I go, okay, I want those two lights on, so C and D are on, E is on, B is off, because I'm over on this side. And you'll always notice, in my work at least, that whatever side I'm on is the side that has the least or no light whatsoever. So there's no light coming from over here. It's coming from there and back there. Behind the subject and to one side of the subject, but the side that I'm favoring with the camera is the one that has little to no light. Because I want those shadows coming back towards me, which is what creates the volume. You see the volume in his face? That volume is created because there's less light here, more light here. Yeah?
So are you adjusting the light output of the 4 lights as you move around the room, as well as turning the one?
Correct. And oftentimes when you do this and you throw a flash coming directly at your camera, you'd better do it manually, because you're barreling light into the camera lens itself, and that really kind of makes the TTL go. I'm seeing a lot of light from my own flashes. I don't think we want to light this thing up so much, and it tends to darken things down a little bit. And so, like for instance, here's a good example in a church. So if you want this, you see I've got 2 lights just sitting on the banisters. So this is a portrait in the church. So everybody's gone, it's an empty church. I simply put a light there on the banister. It's the banister that separates the crowd from the actual the sanctuary. And so I'm putting the flash on the sanctuary walls, and the ones here, one's there, and they're just kind of creating this mood of lighting. And then right here is simply an umbrella with a speed light in it, just lighting them this way, right? So, but if you back up, if I zoom out to get the whole church, watch what happens. It powers these flashes down because it sees them. Because the other shot is 100% TTL. So when you're in TTL, bam, it gets a perfect shot, just like that. But then when you go out like this, it says, oh, I need to readjust this because we don't need all this flash from these are my flashes. It knows, and it powers them down, and thus you don't get the same feel. So if you want to keep the feel, you need to keep it in manual. Yeah? No, because it was literally right here. So as I went like this, it didn't need to move, right? So let me give you an example then of when I photograph a getting ready. So while my bride and grooms are getting ready, I'll go into the room and I'll attach 1 or 2 lights to the wall right when I walk in. And because I have 4 lights, I can put 2 in the groom's room and 2 in the bride's room. And then I have my light on their own stuff. Like it's their own fault that they don't have extra lights. So they just do their own thing. But when I walk into the room, things are lit up and perfect. And so this is what I do. So this kind of lighting effect here is because I have those 3 lights involved in the scenario. So I have one on my camera that's pounding in the ceiling, which just gives a general light coming down. And then I have one light that's right up there that's stuck to the wall with, again, with one of these cradles that are made by Tether Tools. So one Canon 600 RT here, another Canon 600 RT actually back here on the top of the shelf, and then mine on my camera. And that's what creates that beautiful light all around. It just kind of fills in everything, but it still has some direction. And I can control the direction simply by changing the ratio between a light here and the light over there. So however I want the direction to go, I just simply up one and down the other, or vice versa. Yeah?
Are those bouncing off the ceiling as well, the back ones?
Yeah, they'll typically bounce off the ceiling just a little bit so that more light is coming down. So they'll kind of, usually I'll have them like this so that they're just, actually I turn it around in the cradle so I can still see this. And I put it like about like that. Because this light is still going down, but it's mostly going up. So that we get a little bit more top down, because that's where light generally comes from. The only time light comes straight across like this is when you're next to a window. And generally the window is higher anyway, so it comes down like that. So light generally falls down. But let me show you now the whole scene then, how important this is. So you see this scenario happening with the bride and her father? The fact that that whole room is lit perfectly means that no matter where they go in that room, it's just filled with light. And it's beautiful, and it doesn't matter where they turn or what they do, I'm going to get great images of that really important moment. And it's such a great moment, like the father laughing at something that had been said, like he's just in this amazing, joyful moment, and the tears of the bride and the father as they're looking at each other and wiping, and looking at the back of the dress. All of that happens, and I don't have to think about it because I've got my lights filling that room with light. Right? So to me, having a room lit and ready to go is really important. So again, I'm going to go into the room, I'm going to look at where does the light naturally come from, and then how can I augment that light to make sure that the room looks as beautiful as it looks when I walk in with my eyes. Or maybe even more beautiful if I can. So lighting is really important to help tell the story, because then you won't miss those moments. Yeah, let's do this one because I think this one's hilarious. I love that one. Like he's crying and laughing all at the same time. But it's just a beautiful moment between the two of them. So I love every single one of these shots, but they're all so beautifully lit, and it's all because of that. So one flash is on this, well, if we're looking at this wall, it's over here, up on this wall, bouncing up, and the other one is right up there, bouncing up into the ceiling.
You tended to shoot always in that direction?
Yeah, but there's some other shots where I spin around and the mother's peeking through the bathroom door. I've got a couple of shots of her, but the light still bounces over there, and because we're in TTL at this point, it's gonna compensate when I turn around, and it's just gonna increase everything just a little bit because they're all kind of on that side of the room. And when I turn to her, she just gets a really soft kind of front lit, but it's like it's like the biggest softbox imaginable because it's all the way around the room, bouncing into a white ceiling and white walls, and then it's filtering towards her. So, but because it's TTL, and I've compensated the flash. Remember, this is a very white room. The whole thing's white, and so you have to be thinking when you're using something in TTL, you have to think about the room that you're in. So if I use TTL and I don't compensate the flashes at all, it'll try and make the room fairly neutral, like kind of grayish. So it'll be darker than I want it to be. So I just need to increase the compensation a little bit. So I'll go up to 2/3 of the stop in order for the flashes to just increase enough to create a more of a white room instead of a gray room. Yeah?
Do you ever get people a little startled by the flashes?
Not really, because remember, also, I'm not shooting at 100 ISO. In this kind of condition, I'm not going to shoot at 100 ISO for several reasons. When you're working with speed lights, you're working with AA batteries, and then if you attach an extra battery to it, it's more AA batteries, or it's like a Lumidyne battery or something like that, where you're trying to add extra power and get faster recycle times. And so the higher the ISO I go, the less I have to recharge my batteries, the faster recycle time I get, and the less I startle people with a huge flash. And so when I'm in a reception or when I'm in here, I'm always at least 800 ISO, oftentimes 1600 ISO. Especially when you're working with something like a Canon 5D Mark III, Canon 5D Mark IV, the new 60 that Mark II that's just come out. Like, these cameras have really beautiful high ISO. And so there's no reason not to go into 1600, 3200 in order to get really great shots and limit the power of the flash that you need. The only time that doesn't work is when you're trying to shoot outside in Arizona in the sun. You're not going to go into those higher ISOs. Oftentimes you're going down to 50 ISO, which quite frankly to me is something I really appreciate about Canon cameras, is that I can actually go to 50 ISO. Because a lot of times I need to go to 50 ISO, otherwise the light's just too bright out there. Unfortunately, if you're in super, super, super bright sun and you don't have enough power in your flash, then what's your option? You gotta move it closer. And so sometimes you will find, especially in Arizona, where the sun is incredibly bright, if I'm too far away with my flash and it's not giving me enough light, especially if I'm trying to shoot at a higher shutter speed where I'm using high speed sync, and I'm trying to power up and brighten up someone's face, my only option if I'm at full power is to move in, right? So the closer I can get, and that's why my first decision is, what's my frame? Then my flash goes to the edge of the frame. Because that limits the amount of power I need, it softens my light, and it allows me to overpower the sun. And then if I still need a little bit more power, that's when I go into something like a silver umbrella. So the ProPhoto silver umbrella is really great, but there are tons of silver umbrellas. Just get a nice deep silver umbrella, and that's going to magnify the light and send it forward, right? And that'll give you a lot more power with that flash, as opposed to like a white umbrella or something like that. So more reflective, stronger light source, it kind of magnifies it. Okay, so here's a concept that I use quite often, which is to block and fill. That's how this photograph was created, because the sun is so bright. This is in Sedona, Arizona. Sun is so bright that you can't compete with it. And so instead, what you do is block them with a scrim of some sort, and then you shoot again. And so a really great scrim that can travel with you really easily is a very large translucent umbrella. So just get a very large translucent umbrella, pop it up, and have someone hold it over where the sun is, and it will block your subject. So, for instance, here's a great example of that. This is the condition in which we find ourselves for this person's senior portrait. So the sun is right here, and she has to block her face and squint into the sun. And if I want to photograph in this direction, because that's where the stadium is, and I want to photograph that stadium for her senior portrait, I'm in trouble. So what we do is we simply use an umbrella. The umbrella literally blocks the sun itself, and then the flash is pointed into the umbrella, and then the light comes back from the same spot that the sun was in originally. So it lights her exactly the same way the sun would, except now it's this big of a sun instead of this big. So now the light is really soft and beautiful, but it's coming from the same place as the sun, so it's just a matter of, and it's literally one contraption, an umbrella with the flash pointing directly into it. And this is really close to her, so it doesn't take much. A speedlight can fill this the silver umbrella with almost no power whatsoever, and can fill in and match that sun beat for beat. Just because it's that close, it's in a silver umbrella, and it's literally blocking the sun and then relighting right from the sun, but it's just a bigger sun. I do that a ton. I constantly am blocking that sun and relighting from the same position, yeah.
So then you're doing the same thing where your flash is less powerful than the background.
Yes, definitely, always. The flash is always going to be less powerful than the background, because I want her to stand out in that. I mean, there are certain circumstances in which that might not be the case. There's always exceptions to the rule, but generally my rule is that the forward-facing flash, the flash that lights as the A light, the main light, is always the weakest of all the lights, at least by a half stop, if not a full stop. So this photograph's taken the same way. Block the sun, relight right from where the sun was hitting her in the first place. Same thing here, but instead, this one is not relighting, it's not blocking the sun with a contraption of mine. I simply move her until she's in the shadow of a tree. So literally, there's a tree about this wide, and it only has this much shadow, and I move her until she's right in the shadow of that tree, and then relight her. So that I get pleasing light, but see, the sun is helping me out coming this way. Just tipping the edges of her. So I'm getting help from the sun, and then I'm adding a little bit light, but putting her in the shade. Yeah.
What size umbrella would you use for a shot like that?
This is a great sized umbrella. Anything about, if you can get something that's around 3 to 4 feet, it'll cover one person really quite nicely. But if you're covering a lot of people, then you kind of want to extend the size of that because it's got to wrap around people, especially if there are people at, too deep. If you're going to have like a family portrait or something like that, you want those to be fairly big so they can come around people's heads and relight the shadows that they're creating. And then, of course, these girls are in the shadow of a building. So this building is shadowing them, but you can see the direction of light. You can see everything about this background here. And so now we're simply going to relight those girls. And notice that I follow the same light. So see, this tower has light here, and it's mostly broad lit. And there's a little shadow. There we go. It's coming from the same place. It's a little bit forward. It's not too far to the side because I want her nose to look just like this tower. But I just put them in the shadow of a building and then relit them.
So that was with one flash?
One flash, that's
Did
it.
you ever use, in this instance...
Well, this is one flash with a pop-up softbox, so it's about this big.
But would you ever use a highlight on this side with either a bounce or a low-intensity flash to just fill in?
I very, 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 very rarely put anything on the other side of their face. The only time I do that is when I'm doing a large group portrait and I need the light to be even all the way across. And when I do that, I have one light at X power and the other light at half of that, so it's one stop under. So that there's still some direction of light, and this one is just kind of filling to keep this whole side even. But in the end, it's going to, and they're just right off my shoulders. So this one's here, and the group extends past them. So these are just kind of off my shoulders, and they're kind of angled in a little bit. And then I'm getting a decent direction of light. Both lights are kind of crossing over and hitting both sides of the group. And that's just really big umbrellas. So as much as I can, though, I will always favor not having anything over here if I can avoid it. Once in a while, some kind of a fill card or a fill reflector or something like that will go here if it's just too deep a shadow. But I like the volume of a shadow. And so if I get a big enough light source, then the big enough light source sneaks around and fills in that shadow on its own. And so that's just a matter of moving the light over a little bit. All right, so let's talk a little bit about high-speed sync. This is a good indication of high-speed sync. When you're in a position where you need to be at a higher shutter speed simply because the sun is too bright. So in this case, this was in Hawaii. The sun was barreling in here on this cliff, but you can see that the sun is further back here. You can see the shadows here, and then the highlights here. So you know where the sun is based on those. And so my speed light, notice that my speed light is what's kind of rim lighting here. Not here, that's the sun. But my speed light is kind of filling in that shadow, but it's coming from right over here on this rock. It's just literally placed on the rock with it's placed on a rock with this. I just carry this with me everywhere I go, and I can just stick my speed light on it, and I can wrap it around poles, and I can it's just a simple little, what do they call this, a jobby or a joby or something like that. Anyway, these are invaluable, and they're very small. So I'm just sticking my speed light on here and then setting it on the rock and tilting it in towards the bride, and that gives me this shot where I can fill in what would be a shadow that's really dark, but I'm filling it in from the position of the sun. But because it's so bright, I have to tone down the overall ambient exposure. And in order to do that, I've got to kind of raise my shutter speed up. And as soon as I get over 200, the sync speed doesn't work anymore, right? So now I've got to go into high-speed sync. And so this shot is somewhere in the neighborhood of a thousandth of a second. And so at a thousandth of a second, it's important to have that high-speed sync capability so that you can get the shot. So high-speed sync is no more difficult, especially on the Canon 600 RTs with the newer cameras, is no more difficult than just simply turning on high-speed sync in the communicator at the top or on your flash. Just simply click on the little button that has the H and it's got an H and a little lightning bolt, and you just click on that. Now you're in high-speed sync, and now you can go as high as you want. And just keep in mind that if you don't need to be in high-speed sync, don't go to high-speed sync because it's going to require more battery power and it's going to take longer recycle time. So don't go higher if you don't need to. You're better off staying at 200 if you can, but sometimes you need to capture action, so you need to speed up your shutter. A lot of the times I'll shoot at about 4 or 500th of a second, something in that range, because I don't want movement as people are walking around. I don't want to have blur. And so that's a good reason to go to high-speed sync, even if it's not too bright outside. Just keep in mind that when you're moving and when your subject is moving, a 200th a second is way too slow. And so you need high-speed sync, not because it's too bright, but because you need to stop action with the ambient. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between one light and multiple lights. So we've talked, most of the stuff that you've seen has been one light. So in this case, this is one light, simply right here, literally off frame by an inch. And it's coming in to match the sun. The sun is coming from way back there. That's what's creating the rim light on his nose. And then this one is literally right on his nose, basically. It's just coming straight for him, the direction he's going. It's right here, lighting him back up in order to create the light that's tipping around his nose. Same thing here, one light. So I've just got a light here in the direction that they're traveling, and they're just heading that way. But notice that I let them move, and I slowed down my shutter. So I'm dragging the shutter so that the ambient light from over here is creating the movement, but then the light is freezing them here. Now, I'm doing a reverse, so I'm doing a rear curtain sync so that the drag goes behind them instead of in front of them. So just remember that if you're going to try and do that, you need to put it into rear curtain sync, which is, again, that same little flash button on your flash. You just simply click on it again, and it turns to a rear curtain sync so that you'll get the motion coming behind them rather than in front of them. So it'll look like they're going forward instead of backwards. But that's just one light coming, and I think this one has a little softbox about that big. Okay. Now, talking about multiple lights. So this is a portrait that I just took. I was on vacation. This is a friend of ours. And here's the portrait I took. It's a really cool, I love the lake. I love his look. I love the hair. But it's kind of dark. Like it's hard to see his eyes. He's just kind of there. Now, I want to show you the first light that I add. The first light, watch his arms. Do you see how there's a rim right here? And you can see right here on his face, there's a rim that's being created. That's simply a hair light that's being added. And I'll show you where it is in a minute. So we're adding a little rim light on him, and that helps to separate him from the background. Now remember, it's cloudy outside. It's kind of a cloudy day, so I get to determine what direction the light is going. I get to determine what I want the shape to look like. Now I'm going to add the front light or the main light, and it's going to be crossing him so it creates, watch his face, watch his body. Do Do you see the difference there? So now we've got all this beautiful shape. You can see his nose. You can see into his eyes a little bit better. You still have the rim light going on. There's more definition in his muscles, in his hair. All of that stuff comes from two light sources. And this is where they are. They're on the dock right next to him. So he's standing right about here. And then this is the hair light right back here coming forward. So it's just on a little, it's on the flash comes with a little foot stand that you pop it into. So that's what that's sitting on. And then I had one flash stand and I simply am pushing that forward. And it's not, doesn't have a softbox on it. It doesn't have any kind of modifiers. It's just direct bare head lights. But because we're using both of them, they actually create quite a nice wrap to them. The one creates the nice edge, and the other one finishes the wrap of light. Now, the power, this one is the most powerful one, and this is about half of that power. So again, X divided by 2. It's one stop under because it's the forward light. And that's what gives us that look. So in most cases, you can accomplish things with just one light because you have the sun helping you. So the sun becomes your rim light. And basically what I do whenever I get into a circumstance, I look and I find a place where I want to shoot, and then I just hold my hand in front of me. So I do this way before the client ever comes into the picture. I just put my hand in front of my face and I'm looking at it like this. You can see that there's a thumb here, and that gives me the nose and the forehead. And then here's the cheek and here's the cheek. And I can just look at my thumb and turn around like this and watch the shadows move across the person's face until I have the right direction of light for the most pleasing ambient light that I can get in that circumstance. And whatever that position is where I say, okay, that's the right amount of cross light or hair light or backlight on my little face that I've created here, that's the way I'm going to shoot. So now I'm going to shoot this way. What's back there? And I might have to shift a little bit to make whatever's back there look great. Now, if I'm going somewhere where I know that that's ugly and that's nice, then I'm going to wait till the sun's on that side or that side of the planet to make sure that I'm going at the right time of day. So location scouting is important. But that little trick will help you in determining, without grabbing your client and saying, hey, could you move over here? Could you move over, and trying to figure out with your client. Don't do that with your client. That's just wrong. If they're paying you to take a picture of them, they expect you to just put them in the place, take the picture, get in, get out, get done. Okay? So that's my first thing. I look for that light. Then once I've got that light, the sun becomes the hair light. The sun becomes that strong side light, and then I just augment with one flash. That's my best case scenario. That's the way I would prefer to operate if I can. But if I can't, then I'm going to go in and do something a little bit more like this. So in this case, I have all of this beautiful grasses here, and the sun is trickling through a lot of them, and it's creating ambient light here in the open shade. But what I want to do is I want to put her just inside the start of the open shade so I'm not competing so much with the sun. And then I'm going to relight her inside of that open shade with this silver umbrella. You can see that I've got my silver umbrella, and then I've got a speed light just barreling into that. That's creating the big light source. And then I've got a bareheaded speed light over here, and that's going to create the rim light and basically the sun. So if you look at her, this is the final result. You see that? So now you see this. All of this trickling light, these little, that's not the sun. That's my speed light coming through and rim lighting all of these little pieces of grass and providing her with a rim light and lighting those flowers quite nicely. And then my big silver umbrella is right over here. So the rim light is back there, pretending to be the sun. And then my umbrella is right here, pretending to be the sun and just wrapping it down around her a little bit. And then here I am, and you can see that I've got nice volume to her. But the light, because where the position of the light is, I'm creeping it around just enough that it can skip around her nose and light that cheek and light that eye, but it's giving me a nice volume to her face. So that's the goal. Now, in a condition like this, I'm always going to go manual. And the reason for that is because I want to be able to move around and do things like change my position without changing the exposure itself. And so you can notice that I'm changing from here, and then I'm going to go to here because she starts singing, and then I'm going to go over to here because she, and I'm just moving around and taking pictures of her, and I don't want it changing based on how much darkness or lightness is in the picture. So manual is going to hold it steady. However, if she moves and you keep it in manual, it's going to start increasing or decreasing the light quite rapidly, because as I step in this much to a flash that's where you are, the light really increased quite fast. Right? So if I half the distance here, which a kid can do rapidly, if you're right there, if that flash is right there and you're taking a picture right there, and a kid moves to there, the light just quadrupled. And you're going to blow out your... So that's when TTL becomes really important. Now, this is my daughter, so I can just say, hold still. And she does. She's been trained very well for 8 years to hold still. So she knows what we're doing. She knows what we're about. And so she sticks in her little spot and she plays within her spot. But if you have a rambunctious kid that's running around, that's where that TTL comes in really handy, because as they go like this, it goes and powers down. And then as they go like this, it powers back up. So that's really useful, very useful. TTL is almost indispensable when children are involved. Okay, so the last thing that we want to do here is we want to put this all into practice. So can I have a model? So stand up. What's your name again?
Charles Chesler.
Charles. No, it's what's your name? You use a nickname.
I do?
Yeah. Charlie.
Charlie. Yeah.
Charlie.
Or Charles.
Because I was thinking of you as Charlie in the Chocolate Factory.
You're welcome to do that.
Awesome. Perfect. So Charles is going to be our model. And Charles, we're going to do a headshot of you. And what's my time, by the way?
5:24.
Have a seat right there and just relax. As much as you can in front of a lot of people and the entire internet. That's right. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up a tethered situation. So I'm just going to give me 1 second while I start a tethered capture situation so that we can have our images come in and show you what we're seeing. So 1 more second. All right. So you should be able to see what we see once I plug in here. So I don't usually shoot with a tripod, but I'm going to plug this in for now so that it's better if I... There we go. Just make sure that we're live. We are. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm looking at this scenario and I'm going to pretend that we have a sun. So the sun to me is this right here. So that's my sun, which is perfect for me because I shoot outside. I don't shoot indoors like this all that often. So the sun is perfect. So that's a great place for the sun to be because it's creating a nice rim light on you. Now, if I really want Charles to look excellent, I can either turn him away like this. Now you can't see this, but now I've lost the sun on the nose. Because sometimes when you come this way and the sun's on the nose, you get like these little hot spots on the nose and they look kind of ugly. So what we want to do is we're going to turn Charles this way, and now I know that I'm just going to get that cool light coming across his shoulder and across his hair and his cheek and up in his hair. So now I've got a great rim light just from the use of the sun. So that's the first thing I have to expose for. I always look for that first light. So I'm looking for the dramatic light that already exists. And so I'm going to increase my ISO a bit here so that light is going to feel like our sun. So let me just get a shot here of you. And hopefully everything will transfer over perfectly. All right, coming over. There we go, and boom. Okay, so that's pretty close, right? So I'm at, for those of you who want to know, I'm at 200th of a second at f2.8 at 1600 ISO. Now outside it would be 100 ISO and we'd be getting that shot, right? And so we're we're trying to mimic outside. So now we're just going to add some lights to work on this. And I'm afraid I'm going to block a lot of views here. So I'm going to light him from here, and I want a fairly big light source if I can do it. And since we're doing a headshot and we're really tight, that's great. I can use this. And so what I've got is I've got a speed light, and that speed light is buried inside of an umbrella that's a silver umbrella, but then it's got a nice soft diffuser on top of it, which means that I've got a really big circular light source, very large, and it's just got a speed light in there, and I've labeled this as the A speed light, so it's group A, because I always make my main light is group A, just so that I can keep it in my head. Okay, so I just cinch this up, and I don't ever have to worry about looking at that again. As long as the power stays on, I can control it from the camera. So I'm going to take this speed light, and I'm just going to change its trajectory here so that it's a little bit more facing down like this. And I'm going to bring it up just a little bit. And the reason I'm bringing it up is just so you guys can see under it. Otherwise, I would put it right about here. And I'm going to bring it right around here, and we're going to block the internet. You guys can see me on that side, so. Okay, so do you see where I'm putting it? Okay, so the sun's over there. So I'm going to start at where the sun is striking him, and then I'm going to try and push the sun around this side of him. And right now, what's going to happen is this little edge over here on the right-hand side is going to sneak past and hit this side of his nose. Now turn back this way, right there, Charles. See, I've got to remove this just a little bit because I need that light to sneak around that side. And as a bonus, because I'm going to be shooting nice and tight, I can bring it in, right? Okay, so that's the first thing I'm going to do with the shot, is just try and figure out what I need to light him up. Okay, so now I'm going to go back in, and I'm going to turn on that A light. So let me just come in here. I'm going to go to the groups. So inside of the groups here, I'm just cycling to the A group. I'm turning it on. And right now it's in manual because last time I shot it happened to be in manual. But we'll start by going into TTL. And we're just going to tell it to do TTL. And instead of following its own dictates, we're going to compensate it a little bit. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go in and say we want the TTL to be just a little darker than it thinks it needs to be. So I'm going to go 2/3 stop darker, and we're going to see where it starts, okay? All right, so here we go. Time to look amazing. Perfect. All right, let's see what happened with that light. Here it comes. Boom. Okay, so I was a little bit wrong on my calculation, or it was a little bit wrong on its, but you can see now that we're actually flattening out that light. So the last shot that we had was here, and now, see that? Not quite the same, it's a little bit brighter, but I think what's happening is it's seeing all that bright white behind there, and it's getting excited about the fact that it has a whole bunch of light. So we're going to increase the TTL, and we're going to compensate so that that white back there is not fooling the camera into thinking there's already plenty of light. So I just increased it to 2 stops over, and we're going to see a vast difference. You ready? Here we go. Here it comes. Boom. Do you see that difference? Because now it sees that white back there and it goes, oh, it's not that bright back there, right? So now you can see how this light, and I'm just going to get rid of this middle exposure because we don't need it. I want you to see this one and that one. Do you see how it seems like that light just started extending around him rather than it being 2 light sources? It just looks like that light source somehow started wrapping around him. So now it's just a matter of moving my light source until I find the right position so that it sneaks around him just enough so that I get the right amount of light into that eye. And I think I have to lower it down just a little bit in order for it to really hit him well. All right, now we're going to take a couple more shots here. All right, give me serious. Don't smile. Yeah, we're gonna, there you go. Yeah, almost like Prisoner serious. There you go. This is like his mug shot. This. turn your head that way just a little, right there, good. Now that's good, I like that. So what I did, and I'll show you here as the images come in, see how I, just turning his head from there to there, the light sneaks around his nose. But the other thing that happens with the light is that I'm allowing the sun to start to create a crest on his nose. Do you see what I just did? But because I'm shooting from the other side, now I have shadow coming towards the camera rather than away from the camera. So before it was very split light. It was like dark on this side, light on this side. But as soon as he turns his nose around that way, suddenly I've got a rim light on his nose, and then I'm sneaking the light around that way, and the shadow on his nose is coming towards me instead of away from me. Now, there's one issue that I have, and that's this little spot right up at the top, right there. And I get that all the time. Half of my head disappears in the sun because this is a glowing reflector, right? And so whenever we have skin up there, it's going to shine, or if it's a blonde-headed woman or something like that, it's going to blow out. So at that point, now we have to start monkeying with our ISO or with our shutter speed in order, because our light over there is coming in and glaring off of the forehead. And so that's just a matter of looking at your exposure and saying, okay, which of my settings am I willing to forego? I'm not willing to forego the f2.8 because I've got a backdrop that hasn't been ironed. So I do not want to show any more of that. So I won't forego my 2.8, right? So because I could deteriorate that exposure simply by increasing it, but it would also make the flash have to work harder in order to overcome f2.8. If I went to f4, it'd have to work twice as hard. So the other option I have is my shutter speed. So if I increase my shutter speed from 200 to say 400, I'll lose a stop of light from that sun. So let's just try that, but that means I also have to go into my menu here and turn my high-speed sync on. So I turn my high-speed sync on, and then I go up to 400th of a second, and that's going to change the amount of exposure that's coming from the sun and hitting him. And it's not going to affect this much at all because this is just a flash that's fitting within that window. All right, so let's go one more. Tilt your head just a little bit back that way, right there. And look right off this way. Don't look at, there you go, right there. All right. So, let's see what we get there. Yeah, you see that? So we're starting to get less exposure. We still have a little bit of a hot spot there, but I'm actually going to go into the develop module because as far as I can see on the histogram, the only reason that we're seeing that is because we're looking at a monitor instead of a, so you can see in the histogram there's very little spike there, and if I go into the highlights, oh, here I think I gotta mirror this. I might do some craziness to the internet here for a second. There we go. So now we're mirroring my scene. So here you can see the histogram, there's a little spike right up there. And you'll also see that inside of your camera. And I'm always looking at I always have the blinking highlights on. So those highlight alerts are critical to deciding whether or not that exposure can be recovered, as well as looking at the histogram. And I always have the histogram on. I don't look at the full screen because I know what my composition is by looking through the actual eye hole. Right? Through the viewfinder, I can see my composition. So the screen is not for looking at my composition, it's for looking at my histogram. So I look at the histogram with the R, G, and B histograms showing. So I can look at this and I can take, especially since we're tethered, I can take that highlight and see whether or not we can recover it. And it's still just a little bit too bright. It can't be recovered. And so we have to do a little bit more than just the 200th or the 400th of a second. So we're going to do one more shot, but you can see that the whole thing's getting darker. We don't want to go too far with that. And so one of the things that we can do is we could also just try and block it a little bit. So we can also block the sun just a tad like this. Go ahead and See that? If I go like this, I'm blocking the sun just a little bit, and I might be able to get a little less sun in there. So we might try that and just go up from 400th of a second to 640. See what we can get out of that. All right, you ready? And here we go. Good. Excellent. Oh, see, we got a little darker, but notice that now we've fixed that. So now we know the magic number for our sun not to be giving us fits, and now we just have to increase our flash to match that. So we'll just go into the flash exposure again, and we'll just increase that. Or if we wanted to, we could also just turn this from TTL. Since we're in a studio setting, we could just turn this from TTL. Hold on one second. So we could turn it from TTL into manual, and then we could increase or decrease our flash settings based on what we know is too powerful or not powerful enough. So I can turn it to like 130, actually probably 1/64th power would probably work. And the great thing about high-speed sync is that it actually, oh, that's way too dark. It's the great thing about high-speed sync is that when you're in high-speed sync, manual still works. It still fits within that shorter shutter speed. So you can do manual exposure all day long when you're in high-speed sync. And that's generally where I live because Phoenix is a high-speed sync kind of place. Okay, so now you can see the only problem I have is that his head is not turned far enough over there. So let's have you go that way a little bit. There you go. Excellent. All right, now you can smile for me. There you go. Good. Excellent. So now you can see I've got that nice dramatic look. And I can start playing with that and bring those highlights back. See how it looks a little bright there, but we just pull those highlights down. We've got a nice highlight there. Take the shadows up just a little bit. And all of that information is really great information. Looks good. You look great. Love it. So now if we want to make this a really cool portrait, let's turn it to black and white and do a little bit of playing around with it. We'll crop it a bit, get rid of some of our backdrop that's not ironed. There you go. There you go. See, we've got it. So that's how I work with sun. So we start with the sun, and then we start wrapping around the sun. Now, if I'm creating my own lighting environment, that's when I'll start adding additional lights. And so in this case, I would probably put him here. I would light him. So if I wasn't worried about that sun and I was just creating my own environment, I'll do this so you can see it. I would put this like right about here. And then I would take a light here, and that would be my hair light. That would be the sun. But notice where I'm starting the sun from. I'm starting it from over here because that's where this light is coming from as well. So the sun would be here. If this was my actual sun, then I would end up trying to fill from this side because the sun comes from that side. And then I would take this light if I was doing it inside and I needed a background, or if I was on a brick wall in a dark alley or something like that, I would take this light, my third light. And by the way, this is my A light. And then my C light is anything that comes back towards the camera. That's how I remember. If it's coming back towards the camera, it's a C light. And then if it's on the background, it's my B light, because that's B for background. It just helps me keep so that I'm not fussing through and like, which one was that? So the background light will simply then go and rake across my backdrop. And if I rake across like a brick wall, and I'm really close to that brick wall, those bricks will then get a nice texture to them. But if I just front light those bricks, they're going to be nice and flat. It'll be kind of ugly. So I want that texture across that wall. If for some reason I just have a flat background like that, then I'll start to employ things like, this is a MagMod modifier that has little shapes in it, little gobos that you can put in there, so that I can create like the feeling as though I'm, you know, like if it's a flat wall, I can rake this across it and it'll look like light is coming through the window through shutters and creating that feel, because it just these little slats. And you can, they also make little gobos that look like trees, and so it creates the feeling like, you could create a feeling of like light coming through a trees and landing on the ground or something behind them. So this is really useful to throw on, and it's just, the MagMod system is really great because you just pop it on like that and it'll be employed. And then if I was getting any kind of light spill from this light coming back to the camera, I would just simply put a grid on it so that it's not hitting my lens, it's only hitting him. So I would put that grid right here, like that. And that's how I would start with any kind of a portrait where I'm trying to, but notice where all the lights are. They're all on that side of him. So if the light source comes from there to hit the back of his head, then that light source would also rake across that wall from over there, and that spill light would come from over here. So everything starts from the right-hand side and comes around this way. I never compete those two lights unless there's a reason for it, like a secondary light would be somewhere, like if I wanted to have two light sources kind of coming across and crossing each other, but that's very rare. Most of the time, light comes from one place, up above and one side. So that's the way we see things in reality, so that's the way I try and light things. I think our time is up. So thank you for coming. If you have any questions, I'll answer a couple questions really quickly.